Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Councillor Liz Clements, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this October 2021 meeting of Birmingham City Council's Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's a pleasure to have a number of invited speakers with us today for our session on how we restore the public's confidence in using public transport, which is a really such an important issue for our city and all our residents. So very much welcome to the guests that are joining us from West Midlands Rail, from Transport for West Midlands, and who will be coming on to talk to us later in the agenda. So my first duty as chair today is to advise that this meeting is being webcast for live and subsequent broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, and that members of the press and public can record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. We don't have any such items today, as far as I know. Welcome to members joining us on viewing by the YouTube channel and members of the public. Hope you find today's session interesting and useful. On to apologies then. I'm aware we've received apologies from Councillor Zeka Chowdhury, who's unable to join us today. But can you just let me know if there are any other apologies? So, no other apologies. So we're living hope that one or other of our colleagues might join us as the meeting progresses. Always getting into the city centre. We don't know whether they watch on public transport or not. We'll see. Declarations of interest. We have a number of standing declarations of interest that cover this meeting. But does anyone have an interest which they wish to declare which relates to this meeting in particular? I'll take that silence as a no. And then on to the action notes. Just because we've had a slightly varying pattern of online and in-person meetings. These are the action notes of the in-person meeting held on the 7th of July. The action notes were circulated with our meeting papers today. Has everyone had a chance to look at them? And are there any matters of accuracy in the notes?
No matters of accuracy.
No matters of accuracy. And are there any matters arising that you want to ask about? I'm sensing there might be. Councillor Huxtable.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I raised both with the Cabinet member in July and with Simon Needle at our last informal meeting, work that needs to be done to vegetation, especially hedgerows, in terms of making them safe for the public, just from a visibility angle when driving along the carriageway, but also, and possibly even more importantly, when they are walking along pavements and not to be scratched or anything by these hedgerows. And I'm very disappointed that very little action has been taken, certainly in my ward, regarding these hedgerows and pruning them, cutting them back, call it what you will, despite, as I said, me raising them both with the Cabinet member and with Simon Needle. And I would hope through your offices that this could be fed back to them. You may recall I presented a petition signed by hundreds of residents to our City Council regarding this specific issue. And like me, those residents have been contacting me saying, look, when is it going to be done? Because the pavements are being obstructed. We can't see round corners of carriageway because of this visibility. And nothing seems to be done. As you heard from Simon at our last meeting, this issue has not been thought about in terms of the PFI, because they are high-risk assets, non-PFI still, and there's no budget attached to them. And it is extremely disappointing. And at the same time, we're trying to encourage people to walk and to cycle. Unless we properly maintain this vegetation, properly maintain these hedges, we are not going to fulfil that objective. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Huxtable. Yes, I recall that discussion, and we had a discussion as well, didn't we, about the biodiversity value of these ancient hedgerows. So if I could ask this email to send a follow-up query to ask what action is being taken, because it is an issue. So yes, thanks for raising that. I'm sorry that we haven't had a timely response on that, and we'll certainly undertake to follow up from the scrutiny committee perspective. I do recognise the importance.
Sure, I've got the same problem. I've always been since spring. Then next brook, we've got a pathway leading over the bridge over the brook into a storm. Now, I think I've sent several emails, and they just say, pushing the boat from one side to the one saying 7 another one saying it belongs to public highways. So, and I mean, these with the stingers coming straight across the path now, they're walking on the grass because it's covered. They're falling 6 foot of the path. This one's on the brook side. So yeah, I'm fed up, and the same residents are fed up. As Tina said, you know, just keep on sending messages out. We're looking into it, sending messages out. No, we're still looking into it.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. I think if there's something particular awareness, Simon Needle could help you with that. I think let us know, and we can include that in the follow-up message that we send, raising the points that Tim has already raised with us twice. So I don't understand the presentation. I just cycled along the canal. It was, well, I was just mainly pleased that the rain had stopped, but I was actually swerving sometimes to avoid stinging nettles and stuff like that. So I do understand the problem. But yes, we'll say to go away and follow that up. Because I do remember the conversation, it was quite a detailed one. If there aren't any more issues that you want to raise about the action, let's press on. So, Pete's joined us now as well. So we've got our full cast of speakers who are joining us in person, people who are joining us virtually. So let's move on to our discussion about restoring the public's confidence in public transport. So I'm very pleased to have in the room Johnny Wiseman, who's the Customer Experience Director for West Midlands Trains, and Sophie Morris, Customer Experience Manager. Welcome both of you, and welcome and welcome back really to Pete Bond, who seems to be a frequent speaker on committee. We're always glad to see you, so thank you for taking the time. Pete is the Director of Integrated Transport Services at Transport for the West Midlands. So great to have you with us. We've got a presentation that's been shared with us by colleagues from National Express West Midlands who are unable to join today. Again, Annie Bell and her colleagues have been very generous in their time with this committee over the last few years. So I absolutely understand they've got other commitments. But if we have questions that come up in the discussion, I'm sure people have be able to answer something, but we can also send questions back to Alan if there's things that we want her to deal with in particular. And then just checking we've got joining us online. And I think we've got Sophie Allison, who's the Commercial Director of West Midlands Metro, joining us virtually. Can I see her? She'll be joining us when it gets to her item, okay? Because I'm sort of looking at the screen and wondering what comes. Okay. Oh yes, and we've got Sean Sanson, also public who's joining us virtually and is online. Sean, is it you with the SA as your initials? That's Sophie.
Yes, sorry, it's Sophie Allison.
Sophie, okay, yeah, that's Sophie, yeah, and then sorry, Sean. Sean's there as well. Okay, right, it's not English, not to worry. Everyone we're expecting to be here with us as speakers is here, that's excellent. Okay then, well, I'd like to then hand over to Johnny again to kick us off. You've circulated some slides, but you speak to those and then we can have some discussion afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you all for having us. This is a really important topic across all areas of public transport. We really welcome the opportunity to talk to you. So if it's okay, I'll just briefly talk through the presentation, pull out a couple of key points, and then myself, Sophie, or Sean will be able to answer any questions that you've got. So in terms of introduction, we all know the story of COVID and the tragic toll it's taken on people's lives, society in general. From a railway point of view, it had a fairly fundamental impact on what we do. When the first lockdown came, passenger numbers fell to 5% of what we normally expect pretty much overnight. It had been starting to tail off in those weeks as we built up to the lockdown. And it fundamentally changed the way in which we did business at the time. And as I'll talk about further on in the presentation, has changed how we're going to approach the rail industry forevermore.
Can I just pause briefly? Are we going to have the presentation on Sunday, Jane? It's loading up. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I just wanted to check because the slide deck is in the pack, but I think it'd be easier if it's there as well. But it's taking a while. Do carry on, Johnny. Apologies for anything.
No problems at all. And during the early part of lockdown and other subsequent lockdowns last year, our role as a transport provider was to make sure that key workers were able to get to their place of work. We altered our timetables to reflect the significant reduction in passenger numbers. We understood as an organisation, as an industry, that by reducing our timetable, we would have an impact on key workers. So one of the areas I was really proud of is we provided extra support for key workers and even provided tailored solutions by way of taxis and cut train services just to make sure we could keep people flowing. And we understood that our role had fundamentally changed. And then as we went through last year, was obviously the return of customers, and the role was to make sure we're operating a viable railway and starting to encourage customers to come back. We had to make a lot of very quick changes. I think we've made 6 timetable changes in a period of time when we normally see 3. That was problematic, but also presents us with some opportunities going forward, which I'll touch on again. The ways in which we worked, making sure we looked after our colleagues who were coming in day out to make sure the rail services were working, and additional measures to protect customers when they travel with us. Fast forwarding to this year, I'm going to talk about passenger demand. The slide deck's up because it's a very helpful graph to illustrate it. But as we come up to here and now, passenger numbers have stagnated around 55 to 57% mark. The West Midlands trains as a whole, 57 to 60% we're seeing on an average week. The West Midlands Railway Park for this region, it's around 55%. So we do have some very busy trains at certain times of the day. There's also lots of headroom to encourage customers to come back, and that's an area that we're currently working on. I'm also going to talk to you about some of the challenges that we have as a business. We take a lot of pride in the fact we're open and honest as an organisation. We had a number of challenges during 2019. I'm sure you're aware of the complicated timetable that didn't work. We've taken the opportunity through the timetable changes of the last 18 months to remove some of the complexity which impacted that timetable and made it possible to operate. But we still have some remaining challenges around driver numbers. I'm talking in a bit more detail around that. And then there's some of the change that's been signposted through the enabling framework agreement with our delivery group, published earlier in the year, what that modernisation agenda looks like, and some of the pressures on industry costs that we're going to have to address over the coming years as well.
Sorry, we have a problem with the microphone, which causes a huge delay. So just bear with us. Sorry, we'll get it as quickly as we can.
That's okay. I'll take a pause there because the next one is useful to have the slide.
Yeah. Johnny's slides are in the pack that's I see them circulated by email, so I've got them in front of me now, so I can see the graph that you're referring to, which is basically kind of, if members have got their laptops with them, are able to look at the slides that
Would it be easier if we asked Sean to share the slide deck?
It would be quicker because what we're fighting with the Wi-Fi here. Just sticking a little bit. So.
Sean, are you able to share the slide deck from your end?
I'll certainly have a go. Bear with me. Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Fabulous.
Sean, then Ron, 3, please.
Slide 3. Bear with me.
Thank you. So this graph takes us back to before the pandemic on the left-hand side, as you can see, and then the steep drop-off as the COVID restrictions initially kicked in. And then you can map that across, and if you overlaid the easing of restrictions, the reintroduction of restrictions, you can see how the demand has grown and fallen off, and we've been on a steady rise right the way through this year, obviously coordinating the plateau that I'm currently talking about. And that's actually reflected across the entire rail industry. Demand for the whole of the UK rail at the moment has been around 65% for a number of months and is climbing further. There are lots of reasons for that. One of the things that we found and sister train companies have found is that the demand has changed, so the commuter pattern has flattened off, although commuters aren't coming back. But we have seen an increase in leisure use. And actually, Saturdays and Sundays are fast becoming the busiest days in the network, which is very different to pre-COVID travel demands, and to probably an area to further explore. I think the other things to pull out from this is some of the peaks that are probably a little less obvious when you go through the pack in detail is the return of schools and colleges and universities was very significant, as well as supporting key work. As one of the areas I was particularly proud of was the support that we offered to schools. We had a manager actually dedicated to engaging with every school on our network, both the Western Railway part and the London North Western part, to have a tailored approach to make sure that the timetables we're introducing fitted in with their school needs, and to put tailored plans in. So somewhere like Hagley, where there's a number of schools and significant pupils looking to take the train, agreeing staggered times for the letting out of children to get trains that are too crowded at any time. The story of the pandemic for us has been making sure that the solution is as local as it possibly can be and tailored, and listen to stakeholders and customers, because we've had to rip up everything we knew about what customers and stakeholders wanted pre-pandemic. The world has changed. Next slide, please, Sean. The purpose of this slide is to show a number of things. The area that's highlighted with the dotted line shows our train performance in 2019 when we had our programmatic timetable. This illustrates that although customer demand was lower during the pandemic, we took the opportunity to fundamentally fix the timetable. We had a plan in place to do so, but it was going to take us 18 months. One of the advantages of the number of timetable changes is that we've been able to speed up those changes. We've simplified the timetable. It's become more modular, so if there's a delay in one part of the network, it doesn't spread on to others. And we've seen, as the customers have returned, the performance has been good. The other thing is to say that in the old world, our train performance was measured on public performance measure, which for us was between 0 and 5 minutes. A train arriving with its destination less than 5 minutes late was considered on time. That's now changed to time to 3, so the train's got to arrive at its destination within 3 minutes. But it's also measured throughout the journey, not just at its start and end point. So it's a more difficult measure, but one, again, better reflects a customer's expectation and to arrive on time. Next slide, please, Sean. So in terms of welcoming customers back in the here and the now, I've spoken about the additional support we've offered schools and colleges during the last year, and that has continued. We have also set up a new portal for businesses called Just Business to encourage business travel, making it easier for businesses to buy tickets from us. Again, trying to get into some of that headroom that exists on our network. We know that customers want to be reassured when they come back to our networks. Having friendly staff who provide lots of reassurance is really important. We've had a particular program running with our train crew, so our senior conductors who operate our trains, making sure that they're going through the trains, offering to sell tickets, making good quality announcements, being a friendly, reassuring presence on the train, and again at our stations. This has been supported with national and local campaigns to encourage people to come back to use our train service and train network as a whole, and also videos explaining to customers what differences they'll see, because we're very conscious that some people may have taken a train journey at the beginning of last March, but they're not travelled the service since. So it's important to understand some of the changes they're likely to see, and those changes have continued to evolve as the pandemic has evolved and the government's expectations and legislation around speed training. One of the things that's been really important, I mentioned it before, was listening to what customers want to see from our train service, again based on customers now rather than the back catalogue of information we had about their expectations pre-pandemic. We've kept in place the additional safety measures with regards to additional cleaning. We have additional security staff in place because unfortunately one of the things we have seen is an increase in antisocial behaviour. and some of it at a very extreme end, in fact, probably criminality rather than antisocial behaviour, so making sure that colleagues and staff feel reassured by that additional presence. The agility and the working collaboration as a wider industry that we saw during the pandemic has been really important. The ability to change timetables more frequently and in collaboration with other train companies delivers a much better customer benefit when they return. And we've been continuing to work on making sure that we're offering affordable tickets. We have the flexible season ticket that was launched as a national product, but we also continue to work on a number of national initiatives to make sure that tickets are reformed in whole so that customers have assurance that they're going to get the best value ticket for their journey. As part of our ongoing commitment to customers, we also have a permanent secondee from Transport Focus who works for Sophie, called Jeff Grant, and he is there very much to be the voice of the customer within our organisation, and he attends all of the same meetings that we do, and he'll present us data and feedback and the research they've got, and that's very, very useful to making sure that we stay on point. We've also introduced things like how busy is my train, so that if people are feeling reticent about taking a train journey, they can use our website to understand how busy a train has been historically and how the network currently is performing in terms of the numbers of people on it. Next slide, please, Sean. And these are just some examples of some of the national and local campaigns that we've been running. Next slide, please, Sean. I think it's important to highlight some of the challenges that we still have, both as an industry, but specifically as a train operator. Whilst we have fixed some of the historic problems with our timetable that make it easier to operate, one of the problems that West Midlands Trains and its predecessor franchises have had is never having enough drivers. They've always existed on a hand-to-mouth reliance on drivers working rest days and overtime. So we made a commitment in 2019 to recruit a significant number of additional drivers to fill that gap. And that programme was underway when COVID hit. And the way that drivers have to be trained means that they have to be in very close proximity within a driving cab for a long period of time. So that was suspended quite rightly for a period that restarted in October. Driver training bubbles. So an instructor would be paired up with a number of trainees, and they had to go through a rigorous series of tests every day to make sure that they were safe. And that's slowed down the driver training bubble. So we're on with it, and every month we pass out new drivers, but it's not going to be until next September that we reach our full establishments. So there will be incremental improvements in our driver availability. But unfortunately, there are some routes, and Snow Hill Lines is the one that is predominantly affected. And that's because of the age profile of the drivers who are working out of Worcester Depot and Snow Hill Depot. We have Appleton retirees due to go, and they only have to give us 12 weeks notice, but it's a 14-month period to train a driver. So it's one that we're aware of. We have a proper plan. We have the people in the talent pool ready to start their training, but we can't speed it up any further. It's one of those things, if I had a magic wand, I would wave it and fix that problem. One of the things that's related to that is because of COVID, we lost over 25,000 driver training days. So that's not just with regards to new recruits, that's making sure that existing drivers are up to speed on all the routes that they drive on and all the different types of trains that they drive on. And we're working through that backlog at the moment. As you might expect, like all supply chains, the new train supply chain has been impacted by COVID, with delays in the factories, in the testing and the supply of the trains. We're expecting to see our new diesel fleet arriving next year, with the first sets being in operation before the Commonwealth Games. But the new electric trains that will work predominantly on the London North Western side of the business and the West Coast Main Line, they'll be at the back end of next year at the earliest. One of the other challenges is low passenger numbers at a time when there was very high profile around the affordability of the rail industry. The more customers we can encourage to use the rail network, the better, so that we're not carrying out fresh air. It's like any business. And there are probably some other individual challenges, but I thought I'd keep those to the high level ones. Next slide, please, Sean. I think you'll all be aware that at the start of COVID, the government ripped up the franchise agreements and put every train company on an emergency measures agreement for an initial period until September. And these were then replaced with emergency measures and recovery agreements. And then every train company has been gradually moving on to a national rail contract. That government support was vital in our response to COVID because it allowed us to focus on moving key workers in the first instance and then supporting return customers. We started our national rail contract on the 19th of September, and this is the first step to moving towards Great British Railway and passenger services contract that will be in place. Our contract is due to run for 5 years, but it's 3 years with a 2-year quarterback mechanism in place. And that is to fit in with however quickly the Great British Rail setup is going. The investment is continuing in rail, and new trains are still coming. There's still infrastructure improvements that are coming on stream. There's very impressive works taking place at Perry Barham University, and for people who haven't seen them, I would recommend going and have a look. The engineering is an absolute marvel. And that contract is a different way of working for us. The Department for Transport has taken the revenue risk, which is very different to the franchising model. And again, this is all geared to allowing the train companies to focus on delivering the train service for the customers and focusing on the things that are important. Next slide, please, Sean. And the things that we have been asked to look at as part of the contract, and we should be looking at, are making sure that safety is paramount, that we continue to improve train performance, because whilst the slide you saw on train performance showed a marked improvement from 2019, it's not at the level that we're satisfied with, and there are things that we will continue to work on to improve that level of experience for the customers. We need to focus on the changed demand, the different profile of customers travelling, and we're going to need to take that into account as we plan future timetables, rather than just the old way of making sure there are lots of extra trains in the morning and evening peak. We need now to focus on what the demand is, whether that's at the weekends or the evening to the middle of the day. And we need to make sure the capacity that we're operating fits the demand. So we need the capacity to encourage people to come back. With the affordability issue, we need to make sure we're not just running trains for the sake of running trains. One of the other things that we're very much focused on at the moment is the Commonwealth Games. For Grand Rail Collaboration, I'm the executive sponsor of the timetable for the industry, and I'm really pleased to say that all of the train companies now have been working very closely in ensuring the timetable that will help to supply extra demand where it's needed, and we're looking to have that signed off at the beginning of next month, so we can start to focus on all the other activities we need to do to support the Commonwealth Games. Our other main focus as an organisation is to continue to work on getting the drivers through the driving training programme and out onto the network. And then the bit we're here to talk about is encouraging customers to return to the railway sector. Thank you very much, Chair. That's the end of the presentation, but we would welcome any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. That was very interesting, very comprehensive. Thank you for bearing with us with the slight technical hitch at the beginning, and I think it just shows me what a challenging time it's been in the whole rail industry and the company in particular. But you've very much risen to the challenge. Perhaps if I kick off, then I've got a question in terms of the new options, the flexible season tickets. How good is what can you tell us about the uptake of those sorts of tickets? Is it going well?
I'll ask Sophie to comment, see if she's got the detail to hand. I think overall, if I'm speaking candidly, the product did not meet everyone's demands. It was a rail delivery group, an industry-wide product. So there was lots of news in the press when it was released. It didn't get the best value from what people were looking for. But I think it was a step in the right direction. I think the fares structure for the entire industry is far too complicated. You quite often hear 80,000 different fare types quoted for the rail industry. It's far too many. We need to work to continue to make it as simple as possible for people. But the flexible season ticket was a step in the right direction from that point of view. The initial uptake is definitely low.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly increased so far. I think particular sort of pathways have been popular on the West Coast between Leighton Buzzard and Euston. We've obviously launched the product within the West Midlands as well, and that's had a good uptake. I think there is variety in terms of flexi seasons. There's obviously the carnet tickets as well, which allow people to travel a lot more flexibly depending on what they're doing. But I think generally the product has been well received. We're working through a few teething problems at the moment with that being launched, but it's been positive so far, and I think obviously affords customers that option to travel flexibly and not the typical 9 to 5 that we used to before.
But it's good to hear that within the travel in the West Midlands area that the uptake's been good, because I think the carnet style, again, that's something that's very familiar from European cities, and I think that works really well. Any questions from other colleagues on the committee? Councillor Freeman, Eddie, go ahead.
Just a couple, because I work on public transport myself, buses. The main concern, like, with the chair today, we came in by train, and most of the people were wearing masks. And I use on the buses with the older generation wanting to come in town, and it's mainly students and younger children, obviously. It's their concern, obviously, they're not wearing the masks. And the other thing is, I mean, obviously, we're in the same industry with driver shortage. It'd be nice for companies like trains and public transport is to think ahead and do what the planes do, have some of these simulators or in one area. So obviously you can't get out everyday drivers training on the road. Is to simulate them obviously in the early days, then put them out as road experiences. It'd be a good investment for the company, for the transport company. Now we've come out of the Brexit and with the pandemic, it's left a lot of companies up the stream without a paddle. You know, a lot of companies, to me, like the public industry, it's short term. They've never looked at anything that ever happened. It's like the Brexit, I mean, it was going on for a long time, but nobody really planned anything to go forward with until it was actually done. You know, it's really a good investment. I know it's costs there, but it'd be a good investment. You'd be training people either on the road or when I first trained for a bus, we was in a back of Kerry bar on a circuit. Obviously, we can let you out on the road with a double-decker bus. It's the same with the train, obviously. I mean, so, you know, just things in general like that. It's to put them through a test with simulators, and then it'll be a step in the future for not shortage for staff.
Okay, thank you. If I could address the mask issue first, I share your concerns. I travel by train every day to come into Birmingham. I changed trains 3 times, a number of different operators, and it's a pattern that we're seeing. I live in the northwest. It's a pattern right the way across the country at the moment. It was actually one that we were speaking about on the way over today. I've been with Avanti this morning talking about the same topic, which is I think we need a concerted effort to encourage people to wear masks. It's not the only answer, but it's a very visible one. It's impacting the minds of people. It clearly provides a level of protection. I wear my mask every day on the train. I don't think it's a particularly big ask for me to do so, but the numbers, particularly in the last 6 weeks, have fallen through the roof. Whereas if you go back 3 or 4 months, my anecdotal evidence would suggest around 90% of people wearing most services, depending on which time of the day. If you've got a train for school children, they get a little more reluctant. I think we need an industry-wide and maybe a transport-wide push. I do believe there's going to be a government announcement this afternoon that may preempt some of that for us. And then with regards to the simulator, we do have a number of simulators, so we do put trainees through a simulator, but you're right, perhaps as an industry we need to invest in more of them, so that initial practical handling element can be taken up.
Also, could be used for not just HGVs, you know, where it's a big national centre. With several of them plus, like, so anybody can train buses, trains, HGV drivers, etc. You know, it's a big idea if all the companies invest into something in the future. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Huxley.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, in terms of going forward and opportunities, I think West Midlands Trains have some fantastic opportunities in the next 2 years with the reopening of the Walsall to Wolverhampton line, and in particular here in Birmingham, the Camp Hill line. I look forward to encouraging a new cohort of people to travel along those 2 lines, and I think that's a fantastic opportunity. If I can, because we were told about staff training and staff welcoming back, a good story and a bad story from personal experience of travelling on trains recently. And it's to do with ticketing and exceptional service from the ticket office at my local railway station, Yardleywood. Really helpful, you know, and very knowledgeable, and couldn't be more helpful. So that's really fantastic. But the other day, for whatever reason, my Swift card stopped working, and I was trying to get back from Snow Hill to Yardley Wood. So obviously you've got the ticket barrier at Snow Hill, and I explained the problem, and you could see an actual tear over where the microchip actually is. And I was trying to explain, I'm coming in the morning from Yardley Wood, I was trying to get back to Yardley Wood, and they got the card reader out, and it was card not recognised. Well, that's not rocket science. If there's a tear, the chip is sticking out of the card. And the answer was buy a ticket, and that was it. And I spoke to Matt Lewis from Transport for West Midlands when I got back home, and he couldn't be more helpful in terms of sorting out the issues. But it was just the flat, card not recognised on my computer, buy a ticket, and that was the solution. If you're trying to encourage people back on the trains, there has to be that more human element that is demonstrated by the exceptional customer service at Yardley Wood railway station ticket office than the barrier gate person.
I'm very sorry for your experience, and we have nearly 3,000 people working for West Midlands Trains, and the vast majority of them are out of the way to support the customers, and the very few who don't, we're trying to encourage to make sure the customers are at the forefront of what they're doing, and to find a solution to the problem rather than put a barrier in the way. I'm going to follow up on the feedback you just given, both for Yardley Wood and for Stoke.
Can I ask Pete if he's got any comments on that in relation to the Swift card?
Well, I wasn't aware of the incident, but I think it's the challenge of technology and ensuring that we have the provision across public transport to ensure that when technology fails us in any way, shape or form, that there is the ability to deal with that in a very sort of modern customer proactive way, because I think the issue here is actually then understanding whether the failure of that transaction is down to the card itself. But I think in that instance, something where there is evidence there to suggest that might be something that would cause the failure, and then the provider can't be 100% around that, then there needs to be customer solutions in place that are customer friendly to support that. So, but I do think that this is a challenge across the industry as we move from paper to electronic and technological processes. We've got to make sure that customer support process keeps up with it. So I think that's where, and as we come to talk about the service improvement plan and other such things, it's really, really important that we have those at the heart of it so that it can be understood. We all remember the issues. I remember the issues of when I was a child with a Derbyshire Wayfarer ticket and then boarding a bus to go to the border in Staffordshire and the driver not understanding the rules between the two. But now those issues can be exacerbated with technology and to make sure the customer support is in place.
Great, thanks, Peter. Sorry for springing that on you. Can I ask Sophie? I like Eddie, I use the Cross City line because I actually live near Bournemouth Station, and I've been using it throughout because I don't drive. So I've noticed that in the middle of the day it's very quiet, and obviously it was always less busy than it is now. It's got busier when the students have come back. But yesterday I was returning from London, and I got the 433 to Bromsgrove, and that was extremely busy. The issue was there with the masks, but also the driver was issuing announcements. His spread had got moved down the aisles, and no one, people are tending to bunch around, the doors of the carriages. And is it still the case that it's just one? How many staff are actually on the train? Because it's almost as though that if you want to encourage that compliance with mask wearing and any sort of behavioural changes and consideration for other passengers, then you need some people moving down the train. So, for example, I noticed in Ali Bell's presentation later on that she says that in the depot a certain number of windows are being opened in the bus, and yesterday it was about 20 degrees C. And on my side of the train, a number of us got up and opened the windows. On the other side of the train, they remained shut. So these are all sort of small micro issues, but they all that there's a constant message about ventilation and masking. For those of us hearing it, you get on the train and see that there's windows that could be opened and they're not opened. Then that seems a shame. But then there's always that anxiety about if you challenge somebody, what are they going to do? Are they going to turn nasty? So I'm being sort of that's how I perceive it myself. So I just wondered if you have any comments about that.
Absolutely, Chair. I mean, we work, well, particularly with our on-board teams. They've recently just launched quite a significant change with regards to senior conductors and customer service, which is primarily around sort of things like making announcements, trains are busy, obviously reminding customers that, to be respectful in terms of wearing face coverings on board our services. We've discussed ventilation an awful lot. Johnny had mentioned some of the measures that we've put in place with regards to COVID. We had sort of twice weekly catch-ups every week with regards to social distancing, where we look at improvements and ventilation with, the cross city line, where, the doors sort of obviously open quite, often, which hopefully reassure customers that there is that natural ventilation from fresh air on board our services. In terms of sort of behaviour of other passengers, that's something that obviously we take very seriously, and we look at through a wavelength survey that we've got around customers' perceptions of safety. We've got some fantastic revenue protection security managers who work very closely with West Midlands Police and the safer travel teams with regards to passengers' perception of safety on board our services, which specifically looks at passengers' behaviours, because we understand how that can make the passengers feel as well.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful. Could I suggest that we could move on to Pete's presentation? Because I think some of the there's common themes running through it. If you're not able to stay with us, then we can. Oh, sorry. I do apologise. I'm being reminded that we need to go to Sophie from Midland Metro now. Sorry to get you behind there.
That's okay. And then the two.
Yes. If we go to Sophie then, yes, talk Metro.
Hi, I'll just share my slides if I may. Thank you. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, sorry. 1 second, it seems to be. Yep. Okie doke. So I'm Sophie Allison. I'm the Commercial Director at West Midlands Metro. So West Midlands Metro, many of you will know, is owned by the West Midlands Combined Authority. So it's set up as Midland Metro Limited as the operator. So I'm just going to give you an update on what we've been doing in terms of restoring the confidence in public transport on Metro, and just touch on some of the key things which are probably pertinent to know. So our purpose here at Metro is always, and is throughout everything we do, is to deliver a system which is already safe, secure, reliable and sustainable. So that is already in our thought process in how we've approached going about recovery and attracting back customers who obviously stopped travelling with us during COVID. So in terms of safe and secure, as you see there, our number one priority has always been our colleagues and customers, and that will be shown as I go through some of the slides. So by way of background, some key things to note. During the lockdown and the first national lockdown, patronage fell on Metro to 15% of business as usual. So that was a significant drop, almost overnight. Obviously, we had to adapt quickly, like all other operators, bus, rail, etc. We had to put in place a number of measures to ensure that we were COVID secure and could continue to operate. We were instrumental in keeping key workers moving during lockdown. So we put on an NHS. We worked with Transport for West Midlands, who put on shuttle buses to NHS, and they fed from the Metro network itself. And we also offered free travel for NHS staff, etc. So we were key during lockdown. Comparative to other light rail systems in the UK and other modes regionally, and you've just heard there from West Midlands Trains, and Pete will come on and give an update on bus, I'm sure. But comparative to other modes, Metro has seen a greater patronage throughout the pandemic, and this trend continues into recovery. And I shall show you a graph shortly. But that has been different. It's not all light rail systems in the UK. I mean, we are probably the best performing light rail system in terms of patronage recovery, apart from Croydon in London, which you would probably expect there to be high patronage retained. But comparatively, even with other light rail systems, Metro patronage has managed to remain quite high. Part of this can be explained by our demographic. So circa 50% of our patronage is manual workers or people who had to continue to go to work, working in factories or cleaning jobs, etc. And they were unable to stay at home. So we believe that was a key driver for us in continuing to retain a high patronage lumber. We introduced a lot of initiatives during COVID, and as part of the recovery, we continue to do so, and that is aiding our strong recovery as well. And although COVID-related absence has remained low throughout the pandemic, so we haven't had high volumes of staff being off related to COVID, which has enabled us to continue to run a safe and reliable service. A key challenge now for MML is to recruit new team members. So we've got the expansions underway. So we've got Edgbaston, Wolverhampton, and then obviously Wednesbury, Brierley Hill in the next few years. So a key challenge for us is the labour market, and as we expand the network, continuing to recruit drivers and conductors is one of our key issues and challenges. So I'll just show you now our patronage recovery graph, and as you can see, hopefully you can see, it might be quite far, but obviously slides will be circulated after. The section in orange is when we just went into the first lockdown, and then you can see as we started to recover. The percentages against our business as usual lumber, and you'll see there we recover quite quickly and start to get to 80%, during the end of last year, and we had a very, very good recovery. Every time the lockdowns were imposed again, so the second and third national lockdowns, obviously patronage drops. But in between, we do seem to bounce back quite strong. So the blue section to your, it'd be my right, the blue section there where we are now, that's in recent weeks, and as you can see, we're as high as 100% as business as usual. So weekends in particular are very busy, and we're carrying more passengers at the weekends than we have done against pre-COVID numbers. So we are seeing a particularly strong recovery there at the weekends. But I think what that graph does demonstrate is that once we do go into lockdowns and open back up, we've kind of spring back to a high level, and I think now we're just trying to push that up to, because obviously before we went into lockdown and before COVID, we'd only just opened Centenary Square and the extension to the library. So one of the issues for us is that we never really did realise the full potential of that, because it was only open for 3 months and then we went into the national lockdown. So the growth, what we expected from that extension was suppressed due to lockdown, and we never really did fulfil that. So although I am speaking positively in terms of reaching high levels of business as usual in terms of numbers, where we had forecast to be, because we had forecast based on growing patronage due to Centenary Square, we're not quite there. So there is still that gap, what we've got to fill. But in terms of key messages, so changes in travel patterns, patronage is more spread across the day now. So we don't have our typical peaks in the morning and afternoon. These are definitely more spread. The afternoon starts much earlier and is prolonged in particular. Demand has increased at weekends, so more leisure travel. Before COVID, it was probably 2/3 commuters and the rest leisure. But now what we're finding, you're probably looking at 50% of travel is probably more leisure. So there is that kind of change, what we've noticed. And then point to note, concessions remain comparatively low. So that is an area where we haven't seen the bounce back, and numbers of concessions are probably around 60-ish% business as usual. And I think that is also across other modes. I believe they're having a similar pattern. At the beginning of COVID, we adopted 4 key principles, and those are principles what we've held through the business. Everybody's familiar with these principles, and this is what we've been basing decisions on, and what we've any activities what we've been doing. So they were keeping our colleagues safe, keeping our customers safe, letting our customers know we are keeping them safe, and protecting our revenue. So they were the principles what we hung our activities on. So in terms of keeping colleagues safe, some of the initiatives what I'm going to speak about are things what we continue to do. Some have ended now with restrictions being lifted, etc. But some of those have built the foundation probably towards our higher patronage as well. So things what we have done have helped increase customer confidence already, and I think that will help contribute to the high numbers. So we've got there keeping colleagues informed. We worked well during COVID to make sure they were always up to date, provided them with the latest guidance and advice, as I'm sure everybody and other organisations have. Provision of PPE, personal issue of hand sanitizer bottles, masks, etc. Introduction of staff-only areas on the tram. These have now been removed as as restrictions have lifted in terms of social distancing, in order to give that back that capacity for our customers. But we did put those in place for a period of time. And then this next initiative, COVID-19 testing for colleagues at West Bromwich Town Hall. This was something which we were the first light rail operator to be doing, and I think we were the first transport operator in the region doing this. And we arranged for our colleagues to have tests at West Bromwich Town Hall, which is on the route of the tram. So the gentleman below who you see in the picture, that's Dan Jordan, one of our crew supervisors, and he was tasked with booking colleagues in for these tests. So out of all the tests we did, we only actually had 4 come back, which were positive, which, you know, showed that the other measures we put in place to keep colleagues safe were working, but also you know, that it was the right thing to do by doing those tests and giving people that reassurance. So we did that with Public Health England and Samwell as a partnership, and it worked really well. That obviously ended as you started to get home kits. But what we now also do, we have home testing kits on site. So if colleagues want them now, they can get the home testing kits. And also pastoral support. So not only with Dan obviously arranging the testing, but for those who did test positive, you know, we were following that up with, you know, how are you, you know, making sure we kept in contact with anybody who was at home or who had reported that they had COVID or symptoms, and making sure that they know they were supported by us. So I think that really did help us ensure that we kept a good staffing level and also could continue to operate the services. So as it says there, COVID-19 related absence remained low. It was actually less than 5% throughout the pandemic. So that was a really good achievement in terms of what we were faced with, and making sure people did keep themselves safe, and that enabled us to continue to offer the service. So the second principle there was keeping customers safe. So during the pandemic, as with everybody, we reinforced key messages through communication channels. We was part of the Transport for West Midlands wider messaging on the Stay Safe, Stay Apart campaign. So we ran that across all of our communication channels, socials, on the trams. And obviously I made sure it was on our website, etc. We also produced a video, which was a safety video, just advising customers exactly, you know, what to expect when they're travelling with us, how they can help themselves, where they can get further information. So that was communicated through our socials. Encouraged contactless payment, of course, through the app and the card. Interestingly, we are quite a heavy cash business, so a lot of sales which are on the tram are cash sales. So before COVID, they were about 50% of sales on the tram were done through cash. That has now reduced, so it's around 35% of sales on tram are cash. So obviously some of the messaging is getting through, but I think some of the demographic that we serve, not everybody will be wanting to move to these other channels what we're providing. It was mentioned earlier, other things keeping customers safe, opening the tram windows and the doors at every stop. We continue to do that, encouraging customers to wear face coverings, including free issue. So we do give our conductors face masks which are enveloped, and then they can actually hand them out. We did that during the pandemic, and we continue to have, because we had lots in stock, we have spares, so they continue to carry them, and should somebody want one, you know, they do have them available. Obviously compliance, as it's now, you know, not mandatory, less people are wearing face coverings. We did have high compliance initially, around 80-90%. Now it's probably more 30-35% of people travelling wearing face coverings. So we do encourage it, but obviously it's not enforceable. The other thing we did was introduce our flexible product range. So we did this quite early on, actually, as we went into lockdown, because it was already in part of our plans for expanding our product range anyway, so it happened to fall in line. But what that offered was the Carnet style ticket, which has been mentioned. So you had 10-day passes, which you could use over a period of 6 months, which is currently on offer. And then we also have a 3-day and a 4-day ticket. So in terms of the flexible products, they're now worth about 15% of our app sales. So, they have taken off quite well. One of the things which, one of the products which particularly sells well is the 3-day ticket. So there is obviously an appetite for that. This was promoted through our channels, and we also managed to get it promoted on Birmingham TV through an arrangement we had. And there's a link there to the video which promotes the flexible product range. As I say, they are continuing to grow. Other things we did to keep our customers safe. So throughout, we've taken a data-led approach. We've learnt some lessons from COVID in that regard, and how we can use our data to really inform our service better. So we are the only tram system in the UK which has automatic passenger counters on the doors. We were able to use this data during the pandemic, and we continue to do so, and also data from Swift to really understand the travel patterns and the times of day when we're busy. So we know now, Bull Street around 3 o'clock, we have a lot of customers. So we were able to adapt our service and send out what we called queue busters. So obviously when we were limited to 66 passengers a tram as opposed to 208, which would be the normal carrying, we were able to send out additional capacity to ensure people could feel safe. And as I say, we've continued to do that and use that data, and it's one of the things we really have learnt from this. Other things we did, intent to travel. So we did launch on our app a facility where customers could register their intents to travel. This helped feed into the data-led approach. So we would know where people were travelling to and from because they could register this on the app in advance. And that would just help us to gather that bit more intelligence. That's now ended, obviously, because social distancing is no longer in play, but it was an additional tool and something what we trialed with our app developer at the time. And from that, we also could obviously generate heat maps. We now do continue with the heat maps. An example there at the bottom of the page is the visual, and that will show you, the busiest times of the day and say if you can avoid these. So that was all part of the messaging, and that was available on the app and on our website. As with other things we did was enhanced cleaning, focusing on the key touch points, and we applied a product Virucidal, which it's an invisible product which you spray on, and then it lasts for up to 30 days protection against COVID-19. It had been tested in other places and it proved quite effective. So we followed that, and you can see the team there spraying the product on the vehicle. And then something in terms of boosting the team, because obviously we had the regular team, but then we needed a bit more assistance to give that advice. We introduced what we called the CAT team. So they were the COVID advice assistants on the network, and they were there just giving out information. So you can see wearing blue high vis to distinguish themselves with CAT team on the back, CAT advice team. And they were there really just to offer that reassurance, hand out face coverings, educate passengers on how they could use the heat maps, and also inform them about the flexible product range. So that was something else what we did. We no longer use the CAT team regularly, but if things change, we know that is something what we can revert to and give that additional assurance. So what do our customers think? So during the start of the pandemic and in the earlier part, there was many surveys undertaken asking people about their experience of travelling. And from the surveys undertaken by Transport for West Midlands during the heat of the pandemic, we got feedback. where 75% of our customers who felt safe travelling on tram during the pandemic did say this was attributed to good guidance and communications provided by Metro. So what we took from that is that our positive interventions were actually helping. When we looked at it, other modes and other transport, a lot of the response to that answer was focused around there was more space because less people are travelling. But on Metro, it was really heavily focused around the good guidance and comms. So we do think that it did have a really effective impact, the things what we were doing. In terms of the latest survey, so there was a survey which took place from July to September this year, asking customers about their experience across the different modes. And for tram, 94% of customers travelling on tram are satisfied with their overall journey experience. They reported that they're satisfied. From that, 90%, over 90% were satisfied with things like cleanliness and space. So we take from that the things what we have done and continue to do where applicable are having a good impact. So yeah, that's a very positive story, and that those results were only made available a couple of weeks ago. So I think it just endorses the approach what we're taking. So other initiatives then, they're things what we have done, and some of them continue forward, but other things, we also partnered with U-Smart Things. So that's a kind of technology company which mainly deals with apps, and we partnered with them in something we call Travel Assist. So this enables you to put your journey details in for the dates and times when you're travelling, and then should your journey change or there be something which comes up along that journey, it notifies you that there may be an issue. I don't know if the tram was to break down or so on. So Travel Assist has been around for a while. They've done things with London and Wembley Stadium in terms of travel patterns for people travelling to events there. So we partnered with them. We haven't really pushed it because obviously we've been in lockdown, but now we're coming out of that and people are encouraged to obviously get back to some kind of normality. We can really promote this. West Bromwich Albion put it on their homepage, on their website as well, so people who were travelling to their games could put in the data. Now the other benefit we get from that is that the data goes into Travel Assist we can see, so we can look at the numbers and see when people are planning to travel. I think that was obviously very good in a COVID environment, maybe less as important now we're out of that, but it does give us other things in terms of when we're planning service in general. So that's something what was a bit different what we did. And then we've also upgraded our app just to have an announcement card. So we never used to have the ability to do this, but it's, others may say it's quite basic, but we couldn't do this, but we can now put out immediate messages on our app. One of the problems we were experiencing is that people are saying we're not up to date with specific changes, and therefore may purchase a ticket and not know. So we've just updated the app, and that yellow box at the top we can edit and put messages in there. So it's a great way to communicate with customers and make them feel that they're informed as well. So just looking at other campaigns then to drive that recovery. Recently, we've done a door drop, and we've connected this with the Clean Air Zone in Birmingham, and we've just done a comparator in terms of the charging prices of the Clean Air Zone against taking the Metro, and then we've encouraged obviously Metro customers to use the Metro. Included in that and related to a separate campaign, at the moment we're also offering a discount if you sign up to direct debit by the end of October. There's a discount for the first 3 months, so that again is being pushed through all our channels, and also through socials, etc. One other thing what we did realise during the pandemic, we only used to sell Metro products on our app. But obviously, if we're encouraging people to go contactless, if they get on the tram and they want a Metro and bus product, they would still have to buy a ticket from the conductor without it being contactless. So we've now added bus onto the app. So if people want to buy a Metro and a bus ticket, they can do it through our app as well. So sales of that on the app are actually growing. So we can see that has fulfilled demand. I think it's now accounts for 23% of our app sales are multimodal. So I think that definitely was a right choice. And then the middle kind of imagery there, we've been promoting the app and the discounts you get through selling on the app, and we've done door drops and socials and stuff out on the network, etc. And that is just some of the imagery from that promotion. So the other thing, sorry.
I don't want to hurry on, but are you able to bring the presentation to the close in a few minutes so that we've got time for some questions? So
no, that's fine. There's only a couple more slides. The other thing, what we've done is another promotion just about Emmys4. So we've gone out with Emmys4 to get people back into the community. You know, Emmys for your easy commute, days out, etc. So we've ran some campaigns. They're currently ongoing, and obviously we've branded a tram as such. What you can see on the bottom with that campaign. And then finally, we mentioned at the beginning, one of the issues we were having was around staffing. That's going to be a big challenge for us now. It doesn't look like an image of a tram, which should be at the top of this slide, is showing. It doesn't appear to be. But we've also gone out with a recruitment campaign just to try and support us as we grow and the network expands, because that is one of the key challenges for us, rather than just the patronage. It's really ensuring we've got the colleagues to deliver it. So that's fine. There it is. There's the tram. But that kind of concludes that. The other slides are less relevant. Are there any questions for me?
Yes, thank you, Steve. That was a great presentation, and yeah, sorry that I interrupted you a couple of times, particularly towards the end. But inspiring to see that how well you managed to deal with the COVID mitigations. I mean, that just shows the value of basic public health mitigations on top of the vaccination strategy. So we've had a hint that there may be some more positive news about that later this afternoon at the Downing Street. We'll see. I wondered though, yesterday, I guess we're all sharing anecdotes about our travel experiences, which is part of the joy of this committee, I think. I travelled back through London yesterday, and I was on the tube where the TfL mask wearing is actually a condition of carriage, and it's clearly not entirely effective, because I was on a Hammersmith and City Line tube going to Euston Square, and I'd say there's probably about 75% compliance. So given that the fact that the Midlands Metro is now run in-house, was there ever a discussion about making it a mask wearing a condition of carriage? Because I acknowledge all of the other brilliant things that we've done in the same way that West Midlands Rail has done, and the use of technology and all of those things, but I just wonder whether there was something that an extra pad that could have used, given the way that the company is run. Yeah,
we did look at that question. I think that the concern was that because it wasn't enforceable as such, it'd be left to the conductors to enforce. It may incite other issues for them. So in terms of antisocial behaviour, and it would be putting the onus on them. We also liaised with the police on the matter, and they said they wouldn't be enforcing it. So it literally would have been left to Metro, and we didn't think we had that training on that at the time, and the power enough to really enforce it. Now Manchester did make it a condition on their tram system, and in discussions with them, they have said that people still don't wear it, the face coverings. So they're still struggling, even though they've made it a condition, and it's not as easy to enforce without, I suppose, without the police or somebody there backing you to do so.
Thanks very much. That's a very, very interesting answer. Again, and that maybe illustrates the need for a national policy direction on this. Again, we'll wait to see what happens. I thought it was really interesting that you're experiencing the same pattern of usage with high use as the colleagues from West Midlands Rail described, with high usage at the weekend as well. It's very interesting to hear about the innovations that you made with ticketing. Colleagues, members of the committee, questions?
Just a quick one. Obviously, you have noticed since the clean air has come in, you've started to carry more passengers.
I think we have, but it might be just because of the other things as well. Because when that came in, yes, there has been a slight increase. I think there is some work which Transport for West Midlands are leading on in terms of research and surveys, and they ask questions around that. So I think there's a survey which is currently looking at things like that, and we'll be able to get the findings to see why people have if they have changed their behaviours, whether it was because of that. I've seen something with that specific question around, is it because of the clean air zone, or why have you changed your travel behaviours?
Because obviously part of it closed, you won't get the full figures until it's reopened up to 5 ways, isn't it, or wherever you've closed it, down to New Street.
Yeah, so at the moment we've got works going on Corporation Street, but they're due to end at the end of the month, and then we'll be able to operate back to Library, and then obviously we've got the extension in December to Edgbaston Village. So we have got good opportunities to grow both off that extension, Wolverhampton extension, and as colleagues from Rail have already said, the Commonwealth Games next year is a huge opportunity as well for us.
Question has to be, is this something you want to say?
Yes.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Hello, Sophie. Councillor Tim Huxtable.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Sophie. Councillor Freeman has touched on the point I was going to raise, and that's the works along Corporation Street. And I know why they were undertaken now. I've said in the past it's disappointing they weren't undertaken earlier while we were in full lockdown, and it would have caused less travel disruption. But putting that to one side, like I said earlier, there's an opportunity with the extension that we are planning in terms of down to Digbeth through the High Speed 2. And how are we thinking as Travel for West Midlands in promoting that? Because as he said, we've got the extension to Edgbaston Village, December 2022. We will have the reopening shortly of the section down to New Street. What's our thinking about Digbeth?
And are you talking in terms of plans for promoting that as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, obviously, once we can open that, and once that's constructed, as the operator, we will certainly be marketing that as a huge opportunity. You know, we expect great patronage from going to Digbeth, and obviously on the back of that, revenues as well. So that is a key part of the wider expansion of Metro. And in a few years' time, also we've got Wednesbury Brierley Hill, which is a fundamental game changer, and will double the size of the tram network.
And that's what isn't, just if I can ask a follow-up, isn't that what's crucial in terms of creating that network and that interconnectivity within the West Midlands, with Birmingham, just because of where we are geographically, being hub of that interconnectivity, so that we can truly, use the metro system as a transport system in terms of getting around the region.
Yeah, and that's correct. So having those extensions to Wednesbury Brierley Hill and to Digbeth, and connecting with HS2 as well, that is fundamental. And much of the plans and expansion and economic plans for the region are based on having that good transport and connectivity, and Metro plays a key part of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know that both Tim and I are involved in the committees of the combined authority. We know that the colleagues in Dublin are desperate to see that extension moving forward and being on budget. So thank you very much. So that's
And can I add, Chair, not only to Brierley Hill, but to get some sort of solution to take it on from Brierley Hill onto Starbridge and to Starbridge interchange with both rail and Starbridge bus station.
Yeah, that would make a big difference. And on the extension to Digbeth, I've had some casework from businesses where they have a branch in Wyoming and in the city centre. And there's the disruption for businesses as the extension work goes on, and that there's a compensation fund. But I think in the end, the opportunities that will come from having the metro line down Digbeth, and particularly the sort of businesses that are there, like the Clean Keeler, I think those will be immense. I think we've got to just help businesses get through the really difficult period, and then look at what I hope will be a lot of opportunities and an increase in footfall, because there'll be much easier public transport access. for potential customers or people like using leisure opportunities down there.
And in fact, just this week, the report has been released for light rail, the business case for light rail nationally. So a report's come out this week, which has many statistics around why it's helped to generate economic benefits. You know, examples across the country where they've got light rail systems, and it's a long read, but if anybody is interested, it's available.
Well, I think we'd certainly be interested in that. Useful for members of the committee, if you're able to share that with us outside the meeting.
Yep.
Thanks, Sophie. So I'm now going to move on to Pete and ask him to talk to us about the other elements of our transport system in the region. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you. And Chair, just a quick question on this, because I know obviously National Express have submitted a presentation and have on table to speak to it. I didn't know, and I wouldn't or to speak to National Express, but I have contacted them and communicated with them just to find out if the committee would find it helpful just to have a quick overview around that mode from a National Express perspective, which we could just perhaps supplement with regards to any elements around bus alliance. That'd be helpful for a few minutes so that you've got all of the sort of modal elements in place before coming to perhaps the transport for West Midlands sort of overarching perspective. We're just conscious that we won't have spoken about their response to the bus per se, and mine won't necessarily be heavily weighted towards the bus.
I mean, if you're able to cover that, that would be very helpful, because I've looked at Alice's slides and they're very helpful, but without somebody sort of talking to them, it does seem possibly you don't get the full picture. So yes, I think that's very helpful offer.
Okay, and I will just give the usual caveats that the small print is I'm not speaking on behalf of National Express, and unfortunately they're not here to do it, but I've spoken to National Express about giving an overview and just identifying any elements. So just in terms of what they're covering off, because I think it'd be helpful just to understand that they have set out in their presentation that they have provided throughout the pandemic an enhanced cleaning regime of surfaces. And I know we've heard about this across the modes, but also undertaking that across all of their fleet with long-lasting antimicrobial protective coating. But the idea that gives the longer lasting protection around surfaces on board all of the buses, so that has been an important regime, not just for them, but for other bus operators throughout the pandemic as well. Another element that's highlighted there, which was an initiative that we put together with Bus Alliance, was around additional cleaners to be able to come onto the buses at key interchanges. Now, that has been about, that was about those key touch points, and thinking ourselves back to 2020, a really important point around confidence for people who are using the bus network and seeing that at key spaces and locations, and really received some good support in terms of people feeling more confident about their experience and their journey across the network on the bus. As Ali had set out in the presentation as well, the National Express buses have been leaving depots, but again across all bus operators. We were seeing this, and we talked earlier about how that manifests itself on trains. It wasn't an easy one to flow through because of the fact that we have some people with closing windows in places. But one of the actions that was being undertaken was that staff that were employed across the network, so the inspector staff, staff at stations, were then going out to perhaps check those through periods of time during the day to make sure that level of support was put in place. So also seen an increase, as mentioned, about cashless payments on Metro, but we know from National Express and other operators that an increased level of contactless on the bus and tickets available through the app has been seen and uptake through the pandemic, because National Express buses themselves have a bolt system, so exact fare. Whilst we were going through the pandemic, the regulations were set out naturally through government and supported through the Federation of Passenger Transport about people occupying seats, and seats that could be used one person to every 2 seats across the buses. Of course, that is now reverted to all seats can be used, and requiring the support of individuals to wear face coverings and protect themselves. And of course, drivers on National Express buses behind cabs, but what actually happened through the pandemic as well as those screens were then installed onto all operators' buses as a matter of course, and that was a requirement of the Health and Safety Executive that was supported through the Bus Alliance as well. And there was obviously quite a lot of effort went in, and this applied to National Express staff and other staff within those organisations to support the front line staff, bus drivers, inspectors and others through protection gloves, PPE and hand sanitisers and wipes. And again, just going back to those early days of the pandemic, it's important to remember that Transport for London, for example, saw a number of bus drivers that sadly passed away as a result of COVID. And so the climate of concern and fear amongst staff that needed to be addressed was quite a significant element. So National Express have highlighted though that the top things that customers can do to support themselves across the network in terms of that expectation of customers to wear face coverings while travelling unless exempt. However, we've also heard that same discussion that happened around Metro, around conditions of carriage was also one that was undertaken around buses as well to try and identify the benefit and risks around making that condition of carriage, but actually without the police support around that would not have been seen as a feasible. What we did see through COVID was a situation where all of the frontline staff, the drivers, would seem to have to be a significant increase in the amount of engagement with passengers to try and manage and mitigate any conflicts and conflict avoidance on the buses as well. Also encouraging people to carry their own hand sanitizer as well, which isn't provided. We did look at trials to provide hand sanitizer at places across the bus network. We did do that at some bus stations. However, the implementation of that across the whole network and maintaining it was seen as prohibitive during that time. But nonetheless, was reviewed and concluded on that basis. And also suggestions to customers to, it's been going on throughout, to bracket warm, particularly as we get through winter because of that issue about winter. But circulation of air has been seen as key in this process and making sure that people can protect themselves in the right ways. What NX have also set out is around the passenger recovery. Now, again, this talks to the NX figures, but it links more broadly to the network. So we have been seeing slight incremental increases in the passenger return, and we've got to listen to the wider Transport for West Midlands presentation as well. But we have seen some more growth in the numbers. It has relatively been stable in the last month or so. We haven't seen that significant increase that was coming up, and that bears out for potential future challenges, as much as we've highlighted from the rail perspective for bus as well. So we need to keep a very, very close eye on that, which would seem to be moving to the national average area arena, but we're not standing out in that space. We need to make sure that we keep an eye on potential impacts of that, and of course bearing in mind that all of these services have been supported through national government and local transport authority and local authority funding throughout the pandemic. So the numbers and recovery on that would be absolutely.
Pete, can I just ask, is there any evidence of the same pattern of people shifting towards travelling at the weekends on buses, or is that different on buses?
There is a similar pattern. So as we've seen on Metro, it's not as pronounced as it is on Metro, but we are seeing it. If you go underneath the data, for example, there's some really interesting elements that sit within the data, because what we're talking about here is a whole network experience. What we're seeing is generally 3 to 4% higher passenger numbers being carried at the weekend. So you are seeing that sort of increase around the leisure activity, but not so much about the return to work. And as we'll come to in the wider presentation, what we're also seeing is a recovery that has different percentages when you look at Birmingham as a strategic centre compared to the other key centres around the region. So Birmingham is very dominated by this return. That's where you're actually seeing a suppressed level of return by bus compared to other key centres across the area as well. Obviously, there have been some proposals to support the passenger recovery in terms of getting those passenger numbers. Fares were cut in July 2021, so National Express cut a series of their fares across the network, but that was also replicated across the wider network as well for the bus operators. So the N network tickets, that's the regional tickets available on all operators, they were also put to a level. And we've heard about the 3 to 7 day capping, but also now live around bus services as well. The information that we have doesn't really set out very clearly at this stage, given where we're at in the return, as to conclusively the impact of those fares cuts. But that's something that we're monitoring very closely to see what level of impact that's had for customers, for the return, and for people being motivated by that as well. And in terms of a marketing campaign, National Express themselves have undertaken a significant marketing campaign across the region, which they've highlighted both on radio media and advertising boards and promotion and marketing material to try and encourage people back to the bus. There have been some changes in the timetables at the end of October, and that was designed to try and ensure punctuality improvements across the network. The key drivers of that being that, from a bus perspective, again, we see this in the Transport West Midlands, but we have seen some high levels of return in car-based transportation at some points of the region, so therefore we have seen increased levels of challenge around congestion. We've also seen some challenges in the bus sector, as well highlighted in the rail sector, around staff retention and improvement for drivers as well. So actually trying to make sure that there is a timetable there that can be supported by the resource and services that can be provided has been absolutely essential. That is just hopefully nobody from National Express can not doing their presentation justice, but I just thought from a modal perspective it may be better to bring that to life before we go on to it.
No, that was very helpful, and I think you're impressed with realising for them. I found that very helpful because I had looked at them, but then you just do some of the narrative with them. So thanks very much, Pete.
Great. If there's any questions around those ones, some of those points will be picked up.
I have a couple of questions, but I thought that we could probably hold them over because I'm interested particularly in the uptake of concessionary fares at the moment. Maybe I'll ask that at the end.
Okay. Thank you. What I'm going to try and do is sort of lift myself back out from supporting the bus network, which I know because that's a significant part of my role as well. But the presentation I'm going to provide you with is just a wider return to public transport. And this is more looking at Transport West Midlands responsibility in terms of how it coordinates and how the policy and approaches to support a return to public transport are in place, having heard from all the mobile updates. Shall I just assume and carry on and see the presentation?
The Wi-Fi is very tricky sometimes to make it connect, which is why we dip it back down and try to pull it back up.
Yeah, no problem. If it's okay with everybody, I'll keep going.
Because we've had the slides in our pack, so those of us that have got laptops have got them in front of us. Yeah. But yes, do carry on.
Great. Okay. So now changing my hat over to the wider presentation, and this is so as people on integrated director of integrated transport services, and obviously that role is also looking at how we coordinate between modes, which, as you'll see, is a significant part of the journey really that we need to be on as we go and recover from the pandemic. The first slide that would be there sort of sets out, this was an environment, a year and a time like no other. I don't think I need to reiterate that. We've heard some of the data, rail usage drops as low as 90% from pre-COVID. Could any of us ever have planned or predicted that was what our working lives would have been centred around? Bus passenger journeys decreased by between 60 to percent to 97.5 million in the year 2020 to 2021. Remember, let's just compare that to 265 million journeys the year before. It was just off the Richter scale, and something that we've never seen. Heard from Sophie in terms of those figures and the decrease of nearly 60% on the network there. And of course, what we were wrestling with at the time was that position about lockdown, out of lockdown, back into lockdown, and how you decrease the network, increase the network, and make the changes that were required to how we could all live, work and travel during that period of time. So just in terms of that in the context, I suppose that the slide here, how we supported our customers is really, really important. We've heard today, so I don't need to reiterate a lot of what's been said from that work across the modes from a transport from West Midlands perspective. Actually working with all of those partners in the node areas was critical, and obviously we have responsibility for looking after frontline staff across bus stations, travel shops, those staff out on the network, and supporting those as well. So looking in that space, but we've heard around how ensuring people's safety, security, reliability and sustainability was absolutely critical for all of us. I myself bore the responsibility and wore the hat for health and safety responsibility of the combined authority as well. So actually seeing that all of these things were carried through and managed in a risk proportioned way was absolutely critical, working with operators and everybody else to do that. We did some of those things that have been talked about to support key workers, so repurposing ring and ride vehicles, putting all of those things into place and making sure that the bus network was supporting key workers, working with those operators to see how people could make those journeys and the essential travel from where to where, putting in place those provisions to make travel free for those people who we so depended on during that period of time, and also for the children of key workers who were going to school, which was supported by all of the bus operators for the period in Metro for a period of time as well. As I really set out, I mean, it was new to everybody, so we were all finding our way through those processes and procedures to support. But I think actually managing to keep those frontline services in place and keep everybody supported was absolutely critical across our areas. But protecting our customers became a critical element as well. Working on the processes to provide information on what was required in terms of masks. So we provided that information right across our network of bus stops and shelters, as well as through customer information, and as well as trying to get out the messages at every given opportunity that we could. And that was supported by the police and the wider environment as well. We put in place enhanced cleaning and new technology, which was coordinated. It's been mentioned through all the modes, but a coordination of that. And we replicated that through the infrastructure estates as well, again through bus stops, bus shelters and bus stations and key centres across the region as well through our approaches. We also put in place, unique to the bus network and unique to buses actually, was the point that buses contain the most constrained place on the entire public transport network during the pandemic, and that's the doors, because trains have lots of doors, metros have lots of doors, but buses have one set of doors for on and off. So what we had to do was look at key centres and strategic locations, and we would have noticed in Birmingham City Centre, but in several other places, we had lighting and boarding stops. And that was put in place so that we could stop and let passengers off at those key locations before everybody's having to wrestle around the same environment for getting off and getting on. And actually what that started to do was implement a bit of a cultural approach from customers across the network, and in terms of giving people that space and that environment. It wasn't the same everywhere for everybody, but it certainly helped introduce that approach. And we work very closely and collaboratively with colleagues across all 7 local authorities to do that, because I can't tell you how difficult it is to find the space to implement 40 or 50 bus stops overnight and actually make them happen. I spent some of my life wrestling with 1 or 2 bus stops across constituencies of the West Midlands that you wouldn't believe, so 40 or 50 was unheard of, but actually it was put in place and it worked and it supported the network as well. And that was also important around school services and school support as well. So through education, I think it's probably just setting out there in terms of keeping the network running. One of the biggest challenges was that return to school services towards the end, and how we protected, and government took a unique position there where they devolved the funding to the transport authorities for us to engage and procure those services with the education providers and the local authorities. We worked exceptionally well and gave us good reason to go back to government and say, maybe trust in your local transport authorities in terms of devolving these things, maybe a good group forward and not everything has to be centralised in that regard. I think in terms of looking at those issues that arose on the network when times were busy, and that became an issue in the intermediate between the second and third lockdowns, where we were seeing a high level of return. We put in place some quite significant processes where the operators would provide us with details on a daily basis of any journeys that were over the number of anticipated passengers that could be comfortably accommodated. Now, if I told you that that data prediction and everything works 100% perfectly, in that place it certainly didn't. But what it did do was give us a really, really good insight into where there were issues on the network and how they needed to be addressed, and how we could work with operators on a day-to-day basis to come up with solutions to put that in place. And whilst we were chasing our tails in some way, because things were changing faster than we could always accommodate, I think it was a really, really important process and led to us being able to coordinate that into a better space. But the work with partners that we provided through Transport for West Midlands is also one of the things that we undertook at the start through our role in local resilience, was to coordinate a transport cell, which consisted of all rail operators, bus operators, metro, local authorities, Highways England and other partners. And that cell was stood up and worked very cohesively and collectively to bring together a lot of the key challenges. Whether they be about issues on the motorway, or whether they be about bus stop or the city centre, or challenges that came about on a day-to-day basis on the rail, metro, or bus network. It was a considerably beneficial approach that worked cohesively, and actually some of the legacies of that, now the transport cell has stood down, have led to some ongoing forums that were created for that to be kept in place, particularly through the local authorities, because it was felt that we had got a much better and robust approach to communicate with each other. If I could just talk to you a bit about recovery in terms of the current context. This was as of the end of September. We've heard some news today. So we're returning, and corroborate, this is at the end of September, so to 52%. Bus returning to 71%, and metro to 91%. But what we've seen is slight changes in those as we've gone through October as well. Bus has now gone higher than that to an average of around 75-76%, and we've heard from metro today and from Sophie about those details. What is worth me highlighting, though, because it doesn't come across from a modal perspective, is that car had returned to plus 90% of pre-pandemic levels and continues to increase. And ultimately, we have some challenges that has led us to now have to deal with the rest of it as we come out of this post-COVID, because I think we all felt during it the worst thing that could happen would be a car-based recovery that would undermine some of the approaches that have been successfully implemented by COVID itself. But actually, it points out that active travel has increased plus 100% as well. So there is more active travel movements for people across the region. And that is giving us some trends that are emerging out of this in terms of changes in travel habits. So we've talked about the leisure context today and people making different movements, less movements. What we're seeing in some areas is that we're seeing centralisation of peaks going towards the middle of the week, so the Tuesday to Thursday, a scenario being driven by approaches of some larger organisations of business for more flexible working from home policies. But we're actually seeing changes in the times that people are travelling as well. So that is meaning that the traditional peak is not quite the same. And from, again, just speaking from the bus network, because it shares on the highway, what that is throwing in is the challenges of the peak time bus not being the same as it was, but also peak time congestion not necessarily being the same as it was. So leading to some challenges about how we match supply, demand, and performance of bus services as well. It talks there about increase of people working from home. So we are seeing, and actually that's borne out in the figures I mentioned before about Birmingham City Centre being a notable standout in terms of the recovery levels of people travelling to and from the city centre. This isn't just applicable to Birmingham. We are seeing these trends apply to other cities and city regions across the country as well. But I think as well, people are working differently. I most certainly am, lots of us are, in terms of the approach that we take and seeing ourselves as more agile in our approach to working spaces and how we undertake that as well. So thinking about the journeys that we want to make and need to make and how that fits into the wider challenges that we see as well. But I think one of the key things that we are finding, not only from our own research, but also from the research that's been undertaken more nationally, is that the trends that we're seeing aren't necessarily the final point of the process, and that lots of this is emerging based on people's approach to recovery. An example I use in my own professional life is actually, whilst I might determine that I could work from home 2 days a week and work in the office 3 days a week, the future of whether I do that will be driven more by committees like this and the expectations on roles and where I need to be, not where I choose to be. And I think as we see a return into recovery, we'll also see expectations, employer expectations, and the realities of how that works and how successful the technological approach has been. But in all of that, I think what is critical for us in those emerging trends is what's coming out of that car-based economy and what that starts to show us over the course of the coming years and how we address that as well. So, which moves on to the next slide, which is around mitigation of car usage and what needs to be undertaken there. So, continuation of the bold programs underway prior to the pandemic. And I think this is where we absolutely start to come to the point about an integrated transport network that can support the ability and the agility for people to work to move from one point of our network to another. We have a massive investment in fixed lines and bus priority across this region. Some of them have spoken about. Councillor Huxtable mentioned some new lines. We've got metro expansion that's been talked about, and actually we have some. Whilst there are challenges to the bus network, we have some opportunities as well through the Government Bus Service Improvement Programme and the opportunities that provides and the requirements on delivering bus priority across regions. And I think if we can start to see that more as a cohesive network, that gives us an opportunity to provide solutions to then perhaps challenge further car-based expansions across the region. I just thought it worth mentioning as well, of course, we have a bold city plan from Birmingham City Council in terms of the transport plan, which talks about its objectives, about how Birmingham will move forward in that space. We have Vision for Bus, which was supported by Birmingham and the Combined Authority, and the Emerging Local Transport Plan, which Transport for West Midlands are coordinating through the Combined Authority to support bold plans like Birmingham's and others across the region as well, which is again looking at how we can tackle those challenges and make sure that we have a sustainable transport system in the future. And that gives us the ability to provide that increased promotion and investment in sustainable travel as well as we are seeing. Just conscious I know time, I will try and go through these, just to give you a couple of examples, because I mentioned Bus Service Improvement Plan. The government launched something called the National Bus Strategy at the end of March. It came here to the West Midlands to launch it in Coventry, and the Bus Service Improvement Plan is a £3 billion fund, although let's be clear, the £3 billion for bus service improvements was there before COVID. So after COVID, we now have the same money but expected to do a lot more. But ultimately, it is our opportunity to bid to government by October the 31st for what we think we can do to create a bolder, ambitious network of bus services across the West Midlands region. All local transport authorities are required to support that and deliver that. And the next slide just sets out two of the areas that we are putting in there in terms of our opportunity to try and ensure that we're building an integrated network with simplified ticketing and lower fares. There's a lot sits below those headlines, but I think they're important headlines to get across. And the slide sets out that Sprint, the improvements of Sprint bus rapid transit services, so making our services faster, reliable and more dependable, is absolutely critical. But so is the cross-city bus network, of which we currently have £28 million of funding from government to fund a service that goes from South Birmingham, from Druids Heath into Birmingham City Centre and out west, West Birmingham, on to Dudley. And that network of service improvements, journey time improvements, will see us deliver a cross-city service that joins up across Birmingham for the first time in many, many years, providing we can get the reliability and punctuality of that right. And the network that you see in front of you is our ambition to do that to many more services, providing that we can get the funding from government and the support to implement what is ultimately services that our customers, residents of the region, can depend on and rely on. And I mentioned simplified ticketing because one of our bold asks within the BSIC, supported by all of our bus operators through the Bus Alliance, is to seek a removal of the premium in the network ticketing premium. That's above what is currently the National Express ticket price, so that our single ticket range across the bus network becomes N-Bus. Whereas we have several thousand tickets, as was alluded to in rail, we're looking to simplify those with the bus operators down to just 7, which will look to give affordability, practicality and simplicity to the customers across our network as well. Wanted to mention active travel because we talked about the fact that has gone up and seen an increase. And you'll note across the region that also within Birmingham has been one of the pilots for the e-scooter launch, which I do have some figures to send through towards the end that you will have seen, but also our active travel range where we are rolling out the bike hire scheme and initiative as well, which is expanding really rapidly across the region and seeing some good take-up, as well as developing those, integrating that with the network of services that we're providing. The government set out its approach to emergency active travel fund, and we are seeing development and coordination of schemes for cycle routes and expansion of cycle routes across the region, which we need to roll out wholly and fully, but also properly, and make sure we are doing those in a robust, well-coordinated way. And I think the role that Transport for West Midlands has to play in this is ensuring, working with the local authorities, we are combining the approach to what we've talked about in bus priority, in ensuring that we understand the needs of the highway and how we can roll out cycle improvements proactively alongside rather than competitively against them. And although we've talked about the cycle hire programme and the expansion of that, and the cycling and walking programme that we have across the region as well, including the Starley network, which I know that many of you have been through other arenas in terms of the cycling and walking routes expansion, the funding to support those. But also I mentioned here of Living Streets, and Living Streets has been partnered with TFWM to deliver the Walking to School Challenge. In the places where we have delivered that, we have seen significant take-up of walking to school and significant reduction in driving to school. And actually that initiative is something that we really need to build upon, focus on, ensure we have the resource to roll out, but then ensure that it can be sustained as well through the network of services that we've got. And of course we have the innovative Better Streets Community Fund that's set out there as grant scheme that allows our residents to submit ideas to improve the local cycling and walking infrastructure as well. On the e-scooters that I mentioned, it is worth, we've talked about progress on here because we have, these have been active for over 12 months now. We've been through a pandemic, so you would expect that to be the time when there is limited take-up. There are 1,200 active e-scooters and over 80,000 registered users with over 800,000 individual rides. The statistic that everybody loves to see and use on this is that 1.6 million kilometres of ridden. That's over 4 times to the moon, which is quite significant. There are many of us, including me, that have been really sort of bowled over by that approach and take-up. But it does talk about there 30% of all journey modes on this shift away from the car, so it's helping that point. And we're working again, our bus operators, and I know there's been discussions in the rail industry about how they're sort of partnering up with these modes rather than seeing as competitive to each other. Sorry, Chair, just in the interest of time, I'll it's the end of the slides. But I know it's been talked about today about games opportunities. I think it's a significant point right across the public transport network. And what we have to do to be able to build on what we have, restore public confidence ahead of those games, so that we really can be making the public transport games here in the West Midlands in 2022. The other points I would really make in sentence at the time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. That was a very impressive overview, and also thank you for taking on the content from National Express. And I think it's really striking that in a way the pandemic has been dreadful. It has driven innovations like ones that the evolving of the mind art to tackle the schools transport, and let's hope that those things continue. And we've heard a lot about other innovations in ticketing and things. A couple of things that I wanted to ask about are that the level of usage of both the statutory and non-statutory concessionary fares. Then has there been any thought about introducing buses with middle entrance doors to address some of the issues that you're talking about people bunching at doors? I think that's all I want to ask at the moment. So, what members of the committee, any questions? Councillor Quinn, uncharacteristically quiet today, but I assume you've been listening to all the information that's been really interesting, hasn't it? Councillor Huxtable?
Thank you very much. I've got 3 questions for Pete. First of all, Cross-City Bus, really pleased to see this coming back. And I use the words coming back because growing up in Birmingham in the 80s, as a bus user, we did have the Cross-City bus route that took me all the way from Hall Green to Walsall. And it was the number 90 at the time. It's now the number 5, except it stops in the city centre. So it's really nice to see, but we are going back to the previous system, but it's nice. And or dare I say it, what has Hall Green and Walsall got in common? Well, Birmingham to Walsall A34 North sprint, Hall Green A34 Stratford Road sprint. You could sort of link the two together and get another Cross-City sprint bus route there in the future. Perhaps one for you to ponder. The second is park and ride, and obviously I'm talking pre-pandemic, but the park and ride was an outstanding success. In that we were a victim of our own success because all the park and rides linked with railway system and metro were full by 8 o'clock in the morning. As we hope rail travel increases, I think that's one thing we need to do to stop the cars entering into our town and city centres and get them reusing the trains again. And I know that we've started, councillors have started putting in parking restrictions around railway stations to stop all-day rail commuting because of the nuisance it causes to local residents. We obviously there needs to be active travel in terms of train stations, but we also need to look at park and ride and perhaps utilising CAZ funding to invest into our park and ride facilities and plan now for when people do come back to the rail network, do want to get on the trains, commuting, social, leisure. But the one incentive is that it'd be more important to drive in because there's nowhere to park at the railway station either on site or nearby. My third question is, you mentioned the Better Streets Community Fund. Is there going to be a second tranche? Because I'm looking at the website now and there's some really good schemes. I'm just looking at the Birmingham one, Woodgate Valley, Country Park, Wheelers Lane and Barn Lane, Soho Road and Bloom, Clifton Road, Clifton Primary School, Summer Lane Canal Access, Tangier Drive crossing up in Castle Vale. Is there going to be a second round so that more communities can actually benefit in terms of these types of initiatives? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Huxtable.
Okay, shall I pick up all 4 of those? Pick up the middle doors as well.
Yes.
And then, so just firstly, in terms of the services and consideration of services in the future, yes, there's been some discussions around middle doors, and particularly, of course, not forgetting that the proposals for sprint bus rapid transit services contain multiple doors, so we've got more akin to those tram-like vehicles, and some conversations through the bus operators about to the current existing model as well. So there is dialogue in that space, and that will be ongoing. And we hope, of course, there's a commitment to see the first sprint buses on the services on the A34 and A45 in 2023. So that's what we're looking at in terms of commitment from the operators. In terms of the cross-city bus, absolutely. Although the identity of this is about going back to something previous, I think it's important to say why it was lost. So the idea that any bus services could operate through the centre of Birmingham and out of the other side reliably after a certain point in time, as congestion grew, was impossible. And so therefore we have been left with a service of hub and spoke network ever since. I think the opportunity that's in front of us to try and address that, but this isn't just about the cross-city funding, this is about the other mechanisms such as air quality being addressed through Birmingham City Council and those. It may be also important to then start to look at what the future connectivity is to parking policy in the city centre, and all sorts of other objectives that can make those bus services reliable and predictable, which is what will determine whether they are successful or whether they fail. And we absolutely hope, but I think the other important point, just to highlight from that, is they should do a different job to when those networks connected previously. What we've seen through deregulation and the time that we've had is that actually the bus network operates around the bus network's customers, and the metro operation operates a little bit around its customers, and the rail network too, in some senses. Now, there's an opportunity here for us to bring back together as much as we can. So through that cross-city network, although that shows you services connecting, what it should also be doing is connecting much better into the metro network that's expanding, that Sophie talked about, and the rail network as well, which we've seen separate out in very different ways over the course of the last few decades. So I think that's a real opportunity for how we bring that integration piece back together, and the cross-city should be seeing about how it connects different communities and connects to each other's services as well as connecting to a wider integration. I use Broad Street as an example. When the tram comes down Broad Street, actually the connectivity opportunities for those bus services that come down Broad Street will mean something different for those passengers being able to interchange that catch those bus services that normally come down. So it's about creating those opportunities as well.
Tim's indication, would you want to set Pete get to the end of his questions? I'm also aware that our guest from West Midlands Transit, I know the meeting, but I've allowed the meeting to start overrunning, so you need to leave. That's absolutely fine, and thank you for your support. Yeah, so well, just thank you very much for that presentation. It was very impressive. Go on the extra mile.
It is on it specifically.
Okay, just if it's brief.
Yeah, great. Putting a sprint within the grounds curtilage of Hall Green Railway Station, where we get on and do the A34 South.
No. In terms of the next question on Park and Ride, I think it's a really important one. You know, that it is a successful proposal. What we have seen is the level of determining Park and Ride still relatively low compared to those other modes, and it will be important to watch how that develops. Over the course of time, but it won't just need to be a policy in itself. It will need to look, because there is some joint thinking. There are two schools of thoughts in this area.
Thank you very much.
As to whether Park and Ride actually attracts additional journeys or saves additional journeys on the network, and I've seen lots of evidence reported that don't. I think it plays a hugely crucial role. But actually it will need to be looked at in tandem with wider parking policy as well as in its own right. But actually the point that was made there about clean air zone funding investments as well is something that's on the stage to Birmingham authorities about. And the third question on better streets, I don't know is the answer, but I will go away and find out if there is a second tranche funding to support that.
Fantastic, thank you, Pete, and yes, thank you for doing that so concisely. So just in view of the time, I know busy schedule, thank you very much. And I think if we've got any more questions, is it okay if we email them to you? Because I've got some, a number of issues or questions I want to ask about Sprint, for example. Will it be possible? I've asked the question before about whether it will be possible to take a bike on Sprint vehicles, because I just think that what I've discovered through cycling around Birmingham during the pandemic and now as we and into this new phase, the distances that are involved are quite large, and you have to combine, if you have your own bike, that would be quite helpful. And I think there's an irony there that we were at the stage where the 11 route has had to be truncated, but we're also thinking about the restoring the cross-city route. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens, and I'd be interested to see the data about the impact of cutting the 11 route into two halves, because I've had my first experience of going to Acox Green and getting on. It was very smooth. The bus was there. I got straight on it. It was good, but that was on a Sunday. So
yes,
I think there's lots to interesting stuff there. So thank you very much, and yes, we'll be in touch with further questions. And thanks for taking the time. Very much appreciated. I think we've had a really interesting session. We've seen how much the operators have had to change the way that they do their business. They've really gone extra mile. And I also want to say thank you to all the frontline workers. The work that they've done throughout the pandemic. And while those of us in jobs where we could stay and crouched over our laptops. Other people are up there keeping the system, the transport network running. I don't know whether there have been any deaths amongst bus drivers in the region, but I very much hope that there haven't. And it's been good to hear about all the precautionary measures.
I think there wasn't as many chairs as London, but I think there was an handful that passed.
Yeah. No, in Transport for London, I heard a radio documentary. It was like 61 drivers. I mean, absolutely horrendous. So you just feel for the families of those people. But that's why it's really reassuring to hear about the public health mitigations. So thanks very much, Pete. We've just got a couple of form items to go through, but please do leave if you need to go on to that next engagement. But
Yes.
thanks very much. I'll see you soon. So for the just if you vote with colleagues, we've got the work programme. We've got the meetings planned for November. In December, I'm quite interested in talking about electric vehicle charging because there's a cabinet report going through on that in November. Obviously, I'm aware that's possibly not the right order to be doing it in, but I think there's a wider discussion to be had about the charging and the approach that the council's taking. Pursuing West Midlands pension fund because that's in relation to what their plans are for divestment from fossil fuels, and that's something that's of interest to the committee generally. It's within our scope, but it's also an action which has been delegated to us by the now Climate Assembly, but what was the Route to Zero action plan? But are there any more comments on the work programme?
I just think how Keo's took a programme and we need to drag them in one of the meetings and see what the plans are. Because as I say, they've got their ideas what they're doing now. And I mean, some of the work has been good, and some of the work is annoying to, especially at bus routes like we are, when they come and do the pothole. No information. There is coming some online now where the road was blocked, and we got passengers, obviously, who get on our bus, especially the old ones, are stuck in the road. You can't walk on the end of the road while they're doing the patchwork. So we need some answers for that.
Yeah, I think periodic update from them is important anyway, because I think we just need to understand it because we've gone we're still essentially in an interim arrangement, so we need to know where it's getting to from the long term perspective, and that an investment programme has been put in place for this year. If there's certain major improvements, we need to know how that's progressing. Any other thoughts or comments about the work programme?
My internet has just sort of crashed, unfortunately, but the Birmingham Transport Plan, the refresh, the one that was launched at Cabinet, how do you envisage, Chair, us as a committee taking that forward? Because I think every council is going to have a different perspective.
Well, I'd be happy to have another session. I suppose I feel at the moment that because we had a number of sessions in it when it was being developed, and when there was a public consultation going on, which obviously then sort of came to a halt during at the beginning of the pandemic. But I'd be very happy to have a session on that and ask the cabinet, and maybe when we get the cabinet member in to do his next portfolio update, we could do it.
Will that be within the consultation time frame? Because obviously we had the cabinet member back in July, if I recall correctly. The transport plan was agreed last week by cabinet. How does the cabinet member coming back dovetail with the consultation time frame?
That's a good question. Someone remind me when, because I think if we're going to do something, I think what you're prompting is the thought that we need to do it within the consultation timescale, so that the views are taken from this committee within that timescale. So let's check that out. And at the moment, you can see that a number of the slots that we've got are not populated in the green, so I think it's fairly flexible. So we can come back to an item on the transport plan and the elements that you want to highlight. If there's particular aspects of it that you want to focus on in the discussion, then do let us know, because then we can make sure we've got the right team of officers with cabinet member if he's available. Does anyone off the top of that? Do you know? Well, I have at the moment. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what the closing date is.
No, I don't. I'm sure someone is looking it up as we speak.
Yeah, but that's a good suggestion, and yes, I'll be happy with that. Anything else? In that case,
sorry. You said we talked about zero to waste. Waste to zero. Get that the right way around. Waste to zero. and obviously the transport environmental elements of that. Is that potentially something we could pick up with the cabinet member for the street scene and parks when it comes in November?
Yes, that's the intention, because there are a number of, well, there's the ongoing questions about the waste procurement, and my main concern about that continues to be the compatibility of what's happening through that process with the targets that are in the climate change action plan. So yes,
because we hear, and give him his credit and his due, the cabinet member for transport can frequently to this committee and talk about how the transport elements of, waste to zero,
route to zero.
Route to zero, ridiculous. Route to zero.
Which would be also aiming for zero waste, because that's my main beef about this. But don't get me started, because we are now running over.
Yes,
Let's try.
sorry, and route to zero is progressing on the transport field, but and his portfolio. But we obviously don't hear as frequently for the cabinet member for streets in the parks.
No, I agree with you, and I think my main contribution in council in September, I have a real concern about the level of buy-in from other services, and that this action plan will not work unless there is a corporate approach and some genuine one organisation working across the council.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just Councillor O'Shea in his portfolio for street scene, it's also now Councillor Zane is the cabinet member for housing. So, but I think that we've got Councillor O'Shea coming in to talk about the plastics response, which again, I found disappointing. I've already said that in the public forum and the waste procurement. But obviously, we need to keep tracking the climate change action plan, and we've got to. Once the team is in place in January, I think we want to have a substantive item on the whole spectrum of the response. But I think, in fairness to the people working on it at the moment, they are doing it in addition to all the things they're already doing. So we've been holding that back until we start to have the dedicated team in place. So we've got Ellie Forward-Schmidt coming in November, and I anticipate having a session in January about the action plan. But again, very valid question to raise, Tim. Okay, and if we can move on then, are there any requests for calling or council call for actions or petitions? I don't think so. Any other urgent business?
No.
No. And will you give me authority to act with the relevant chief officer in between meetings if it's necessary?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks for your patience, everybody, for a long run.